Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here in the turns between your favorite game. I'm Jake Friedman.
I'm Brendan Hansen.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And in today's episode, we're talking all about dueling games, a sort of colloquial way of saying two-player games. But I think in this episode, we'll tease out if there's sort of an aesthetic consideration of why some people call dueling games. We'll talk about popular dueling games like Seven Wonders Duel, maybe games like Fox in the Forest, Lost Cities, really two-player games. We'll discuss the decision space and the consequence for those games being two-player, what sort of that opens up about the feel of those games and the types of decisions you can make. And then in the second half of the episode, we're going to talk about a game that's not yet released, but that we've played a lot on Board Game Arena. And it's a forthcoming game from Paolo Mori and Alessandro Zucchini called Toy Battle. It's very good. Very good. Not good.
And I have a major, and just to get people excited, teed up, I have a major problem with Brendan's premise for this whole episode, which I have not shared with him yet. So that'll be coming later.
This is classic.
But before we get to that, hooray! Decision Space has been nominated once again for the Golden Geek Award for Best Board Game Podcast. And it's truly amazing. This is the third year we've been nominated for this, which means the world to us. We are genuinely honored. Just to be nominated is huge. So thank you all so much for voting for us and getting us through to this stage of voting, because that in and of itself is just a massive win for our podcast. And also just for our personal self-esteem. It makes us feel so good to know that people are enjoying the show enough to go out and cast a vote.
This actually, too, Jake, has typically corresponded with the largest leap of listenership we'll have all year. The most impactful potential sort of billboard in all of board games. So truly, if you are one of our listeners who took the time to vote for us and nominate us for the Golden Geek, you have our sincere appreciation and thanks. And if you're going to vote in the big shebang, the not just the nominations, the awards, we would really appreciate it if you'll vote for us again. I bet you will. You got us here.
Yeah.
You'll throw us in the hat. The little
but
space
please do go vote for us over on BoardGameGeek.com. Being a finalist, nominee, even winning would be absolutely incredible. Yeah. That'd be awesome. So please do that, and thanks again. Other housekeeping before we get into the episode, I think we could say typically when we get nominated for the Golden Geek, we're this is a great opportunity to do our top 10 board games of all time list. That's always a really popular episode. That's coming. I think we're doing it in 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah. And in 2 episodes when we do.
In 2 episodes, because we've got 4 hosts this time. So you'll have all 4 hosts in episode part 1, counting down 10 to 6, and then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in the next week's episode. And then before that, we're going to have a super special guest joining us to have their insight on the show. So maybe we'll save who that is. But yeah, so some just killer episodes lined up for you. Make sure you're subscribed and paying attention to the podcast, because you're not going to want to miss the next few episodes. So with that out of the way, let's get into this week's discussion.
Oh. Well, I thought we were going to talk about the premise of the show at this point, but I think we're going to talk about Jake's problem with the premise of the show.
No, don't delete. Brendan just deleted so many notes.
I'm moving them.
Control Z, I need those.
Okay. They're coming back. back.
So anyway, we're going to talk about what dueling games are. And really my premise was more, my problem was when I looked at your list of great dueling games.
Oh, okay. Phew.
Because what I think is, when you see a game that says Azul Duel. What that is telling us as board game players is that is a 2-player game.
Yes.
A 2-player version of the game. But I feel like duel is a specific term that, at least to me, connotates more than just a 2-player game. Yeah, I feel like you can have 2-player games that feel like a duel, and 2-player games, maybe they even say duel on the box, but it doesn't feel like a duel to me. Like I
I'm
want, yeah, Brendan,
I'm so
your thoughts?
happy that we get to have I had this conversation in my head, and now I just get to have it with you because I thought going to this episode, right, is there a difference between a dual game and a two-player only game? Could I conceive of a popular two-player game that didn't feel like a dual game? And I think that that's actually important, intrinsic to the decision space of two-player games. Because what you're getting at here, Jake, is dual games are more interactive, maybe you're more confrontational. Is that what you're saying with the other player?
I think like, I mean, don't make me go like Merriam-Webster on you, but duel is like a fight, right? Um,
Sure. Yeah.
so I think for me, when I think of the term duel, it means
Mhm.
some sort of like confrontation. Um,
Mm.
and I think that 2-player games, while they're inherently zero sum, does not in of itself raise that bar to feeling really
Mm.
confrontational. And I think that's for me, like when I play a game that feels like a duel, and I don't really care if you call your game whatever you want to indicate that it's a 2-player experience. But when I play a game that feels like I'm having a duel with my opponent, um, there's more to it than just that I'm playing a 2-player game.
So for you, air, land, and sea, a duel
Yes.
where
Yes.
you're directly fighting in these three different theaters, air, land, and sea, trying to, in some ways, outthink your opponent, but
Yeah.
maybe Lost Cities wouldn't be?
I think Lost Cities is a duel also because in Lost Cities you're competing, right, for like each of the scoring potential.
Yeah.
Well, I guess,
Yeah.
I guess you're
Okay.
technically
Okay.
both people could score, right? But like
Yeah.
it feels like I don't know. That feels pretty fighty. Feels like really back and forth. I don't know. We recently played Azul Duel. That did not feel very dueling to me.
Mm.
Or even a game like Patchwork, where it's a quintessential excellent 2-player game. Um, and yes, we're competing over the same set of tiles. What I take, you can't have. But so much of my mental space is on optimizing my tile placement puzzle on my personal player board, right? Away from like the interactive element of the game. That it makes it more, it takes it out of kind of that dueling feeling for me. And that's really all I want to say. I don't want to belabor the point too much. Um, I don't think it's a huge deal, but the reason I bring it up is because when we say, okay, this is an episode about dual games. For me, I would be thinking about like the battle cons, right? The kind of like, or even like collectible card games, like the Magic the Gathering type of games of the world, where it's like we're really clashing, we're fighting, we're duelers in an arena, so to speak, more so than a a 2-player games episode, because I think that could be its own episode and potentially a little bit more nuanced.
I'm definitely with you theoretically that you could have two-player games that don't feel like dueling games. But
Yes.
I think that a lot of popular two-player games, because the decision space of two-player games is almost this mirrored decision space, right? Where if we're playing a multiplayer game, my considerations are usually how can I best help myself with this action? And
Hmm.
this is something we've talked about the show a lot, right? Where sometimes in these sort of multiplayer economic games, my incentives for actually stopping the leader are quite low if I'm not in second place, right? My incentive is just to help myself the most
Hmm.
because I don't if I stop the leader in a multiplayer economic game, if I slow the leader down in a way that helps me slightly less, I'm helping the person in second more than I'm helping myself if what I care about most is to win. Whereas in a two-player game, you never have that sort of political quandary in that same way, right? Because anything I do to help me in a two-player game will likely hurt you. And you could come up with instances where that might not be the case, right? If it was a set collection game where we're going after different types of sets, maybe you could come up with situations in this sort of two-player game where we're both doing our own puzzle and it's whomever competes at that puzzle the best. And resources are plentiful, so you can't hate draft, you can't take what someone else wants, you can't really block them or get in their way. We're just sort of playing in parallel. I'm
Yeah.
with you that those
Yep.
games would not be duel games. Yes. But I think a lot of popular two-player games are these sort of dueling style games that want you to be sort of combatively interactive. And I think part of that is because a two-player game already leans into that
Mm-hmm.
somewhat because of the zero-sum nature of the decision space. And I really enjoy that type of decision space. So either way, I think yes, we'll have a great episode. And then maybe we can talk about two-player games at some point and have a nuanced, different version of this conversation. But I think that two-player games do a lot of interesting things. One, they give you that mirrored decision space, which we've hit on briefly. But I think that's really important, right? You sort of take the exact same decisions. You could play a multiplayer game at 3 players and then play it for 2, and it will feel really different. So something like King Domino comes to
Mm-hmm.
mind for that. Even if you were playing, doesn't matter sort of if you're doing the 5x5 or the 7x7, it feels different. The types of the decisions you make are different. But it also just opens up space for, I think, more mind games, or at least more me trying to get into the mind of my opponent, right? Because there's less noise. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to think about all the considerations of what all the other players might be doing, what they might want to be doing. I can just, Jake, if we're playing, I can just look across the table, look at my hand or my position, and then think about what information I have about Jake's and get in his head more than I would care to exert the effort if I was at a table of 6 people.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think when I think of getting into the mind of the opponent, that is something that makes it feel
Like a
really
duel?
dually, right?
Yeah.
Like you're in that instance, like you are a
Mhm.
duelist, right? You're like
Yeah.
you're in the donkey space. If I, you know, I think my opponent is going to dodge left, so I'm going to feint, right, and then come with my real attack. Like that is kind of the terminology that you'd use for dueling. But that's not all two-player games, certainly, right? And I think
Right.
a game like chess comes to mind, where yes, you're kind of thinking ahead. Um, but at least for me, not a super advanced chess player, right? It's so much more about like what's on the board, right? There's no
Yep.
kind of combat tricks or something uh, coming from somewhere unseen. Um, so yeah, so I think that's an area where like games can feel more or less dueling in the two-player space. And then as for mirrored decision space, it doesn't always have to be that though, right? Like I think of a game like Dracula versus Van Helsing, which we
Sure.
covered, which has a very similar, like, that is a two-player game where you have slightly different I guess directives, right, on how you're trying to win the
Yep.
game. Does that feel dually to you?
So, okay, the setup of that game, we covered that in a sort of two-part episode where we also covered Castle Combo late last year. And if it's set up where you're both trying to collect these hands of cards more or less, and you have different values and you're comparing values and suits of those cards. So you build up, build up, build up, and then at some point you're going to have this reveal. And then
Mhm.
on one side, you're just trying to win everywhere as one of the players, Van Helsing, I think. No, Dracula. And then no, Van Helsing just wants to hit Dracula. So it doesn't matter where
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
hit. Yeah, because you're just going for the number of hits overall, and Dracula wants a density of hits. So there's these locations. Your 5 card slots in your hand correspond to quote unquote 5 locations on the board. But everything else about that game, besides that, plays the same for both sides. And to me, it does feel like a duel. But I think because you're comparing cards directly. That really
Yeah.
helps it feel like a duel. It also helps it feel like a duel because you can really stick it to your opponent for knowing what they want to be accomplishing, right? Where you can switch the trump suit in that game. So you could make it such that, oh, I have the sense that Jake's going for a bunch of yellow cards. I'm going to make that suit trash. So Jake suffers and I will benefit in some way. And
Yeah.
I think because
Interesting.
of those 2 head-to-head things, it really does. And then thematically, it's leaning into that, right? The theme of it
Yeah.
is a duel, Dracula
Yeah.
versus Van Helsing. So I think for all of those things, even though the mechanics of that game, you're not actually interacting directly with the other
Yeah.
player at all, outside of maybe swapping cards, which is not that combative.
Yeah.
It all gets, protracted into that like scoring comparison that you actually interact. So there's no simultaneous choice, but a simultaneous reveal, and I think that makes it feel a bit like a duel to me. How about you? I see
Yeah,
you
I don't
wincing.
know. It doesn't, it just like, for the theme and for the fact that you have like this two-player game and you're like directly competing with each other,
Yeah.
it didn't like get me into that kind of dueling headspace. And I wonder if part of it has to do, and we're really pulling hairs here. I think this is something that's might be like in the eye of the beholder. How much are you kind of like getting into
Yeah.
that like experience with your play? I think maybe part of the reason for me it didn't quite feel like that is because like the exchanges feel pretty
Mm.
limited, right? Like I think I would in a dueling game, uh like having a lot of kind of like short exchanges makes it feel like we're trading blows
Mm.
a lot more, and this just kind of felt like more like I'm just like dirtling around with my own hand management puzzle, and then every once in a while we sort of reveal them. This is neither here nor there, but I did think it was interesting that we thought that Dracula had an easier time winning, and I saw some coverage of that game on Shut Up and Sit Down, and they found the same thing.
Okay, yeah. Well, when you sit back and look at the mechanics of that game, I
Anyway.
don't know how it would be that way. In some ways, but that's okay. Um, it's interesting because I think this premise is I understand the premise that you're getting at, and I can think of some examples of games that probably actually feel less like a duel, that are two-player games that fit in this weight class. Have you played Morels?
No,
It's also
but
called
tell me about it.
Fungi. It's so this is a set collection card game where you are trying to collect these different sets of mushrooms, and every mushroom it's been a long time since I played this, but you lay out this river of cards, and then it's only a two-player game, and you're trying to collect cards from this river as it is flowing, and you can spend sticks that you can get by trading in cards to take from higher up in the river, and it's a river because it flows down, and eventually the cards will go away. And it is not directly interactive. It is zero sum, right? Because if I'm collecting hen of the woods, a type of mushroom, and you want to also be collecting hen of the woods, there's only so many of those, but we don't interact more directly than that. And it's pretty placid in sort of theme and feel because it's just a pure set collection game with this couple little wrinkles. So to me, that doesn't feel directly interactive in maybe the way that you want dueling games to feel. Jaipur is another one that comes to mind as a game
Mhm.
neither of us really like, but a game that gets mentioned at this weight class a lot. Sorry, was I not supposed to lead that way?
No,
Um,
no, it's
but
yeah.
do you think that reaches dueling for you? Jaipur is another sort of set collection game where you're collecting from the same pool, and then you're trying to be the first, typically, to trade them in to get higher value return for what you traded, but not always. There's other
I
considerations.
the more we talk about it, the more I think like all of these games are on a spectrum
Yep.
um, of
Interaction.
interaction, but it's almost a thematic type of
Mm.
interaction, right? And this is gonna draw back from an old episode about what is it, like the types of decisions. No, it was our episode on themes, the type of
Yeah.
themes in games, right? Where there's environmental theme, there's sort of like the mechanical theme, which is that the mechanics are themed, and then there's this type of theme that I think comes up less often, which is we called it agential or decisional theme, where the the actual decisions you're making in the game make it feel like you're sort of living out the theme. So I think it's sort of
Mm.
on that spectrum of like a gentle theme of two duelists in an arena, right? Like to that actual definition of the word. If the actual decisions I'm making in the game draws parallels to sort of two combatants. It doesn't have to be like fighting or whatever gladiators. It could be, but to two combatants uh,
A guitar battle.
fighting against each other.
Yeah.
That makes it feel more like I'm having a duel with my opponent. And then, when you get to a game like Jaipur or, maybe Lost Cities, I was made too fast to say like that does feel like a duel game, or I'm evolving. I'm
Yeah, yeah.
changing my position on the fly, right? Like, yes, you can draw those comparisons, but you have to really draw it out compared to a game like BattleCon, where it's
Sure.
like I'm controlling a fighter, you're controlling a fighter, the arena's in front of us, and on our turn we're deciding what fight move we're doing. Like
Sure.
that is, that feels like we're having a duel. It doesn't take much to get me into that kind of headspace.
So, Seven Wonders Duel,
Yeah.
kind of the game that sort of reached a big enough popularity that people just sort of took the duel and ran with that term. I think Bruno Cathala, one of the designers of the Seven Wonders Duel, sort of carved out this cottage industry of duel games, designing things like Splendor Duel or his own Sobek for two players, not actually called Sobek Duel, which I think is interesting. But then you have games like Azul Duel, Cosmic Encounter Duel, a duel
Guessing
game that
Sobek
didn't
for two
even.
players didn't sell like some of these other duel games
I don't
today.
know that it did, but
Back to the duel naming convention.
yeah. But do you think one? I just want to acknowledge Seven Wonders Duel because
Yeah.
a very important game in this conversation. We don't have this episode if that game doesn't exist.
Right.
I've played it a fair amount. You've played it a fair amount, way more than you've played Seven Wonders because you've played that game zero.
Correct.
So if you take Seven Wonders Duel has a few different metrics in which you could win or lose that game. There's multiple victory conditions, right? There's end game scoring. There's a science victory that's a set collection puzzle. And then there's this tug of war military battle where if someone drafts more military than the other player in a density, then they can win the game basically by kicking the other person out of the game. Like you push them off the edge. So if you took that tug of war with the direct combat out of that game, the rest of the game is just this economic set collection puzzle where you're either collecting points or icons that give you powers and could potentially win you the game. Do you think that would make it feel less like a quote duel game to you? You take the military out.
I do think there's some, as I was talking about, theme definitely matters here for this conversation. So I do think removing the military aspect of the game, that just brings players right there. It's like we are talking about fighting too.
Yeah.
I do think it would feel a little bit less duely. I think this game is higher on the dual spectrum for me than others because it has that, but also because it has a lot of exchanges, like all these like small exchanges. Like, okay, I'm hitting you on military, I'm responding by hitting you on science, right? Or
Yeah.
I'm taking the banking card that's going to make, uh, you know, whatever, however it works, right? Where it's like I can make your resources more expensive, and you can like respond by getting gold more efficiently, or
Yep.
so like I think all of those little exchanges is something that feels closer, kind of on that like decisional theming access to I punch, you block, and then try and sweep a leg kick at me.
So completely, I hear you. So then let's go somewhere totally different. I'm taking you to the
Yeah.
woods. Fox in the Forest. Fox in the Forest.
Yeah.
Two-player trick-taking game. There's this shared deck of cards where you are going back and forth, and you're trying to. It's a standard trick-taking rules, except you don't know if you want to win or lose tricks. Basically, when you start, because you either want to win 7 tricks more or less, or not win. If you win them all, you lose. So you're either trying to win just enough or not win any, which will force your opponent to win them all. So you have this interesting conflict within your own hand of, is this going to be a winning hand, a losing hand? If it's somewhere in between, can I win enough that I win more than the other person and get more points? Is it losing enough that I should try to sandbag and force the other person to win them all? I'm in your head when I play that game, but
Yeah.
I'm not there are no crossbows, there's no swords.
Yeah.
There's, bells, cups, foxes, and fairies. What do you think? For me, that feels like a dueling game. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like right there.
It's
If
right there.
we're
I mean,
yeah.
it the the thing the reasons it feels like a dueling game are everything you've mentioned. The things
Yeah.
that make it not feel like a dueling game is the fact that I'm not making a joke. I think I agree with you here. Like again, this is higher on the spectrum, probably right around where I would put a game like Seven Wonders Duel,
Yeah.
to the point where it it's over the bar of where somebody's like, this feels like we're having a duel when we play this game. I'm not going to
Yeah.
say, yeah, I'm not going to look at them side eye and be like, really, you know.
Yeah.
But I think there's something about trick taking for me. Um, I would love to hear what Pete has to say about this, our resident
Mm.
trick taking expert, where it is a mechanism that does not seem to like blend into the soup well. Like it kind of
Mm.
always feels like it's, and there's the trick taking part, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of, you know what I mean? And so I think like for the decisional theme aspect of like when I'm making this decision, do I feel like I'm enacting a duel? I
Mm.
don't with trick taking, right? Like I feel like I'm doing trick taking. Like it just kind of, and that's not a bad thing. I think that's part of the reason why trick taking is like so beloved by so many people is like all these games, have this like shared language and this thing, and it is like very much always trick taking when you break one of them out with a
I
twist.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm going to okay. So I'm going to say two things. One, I'm going to say something that I'm going to ask you to give your thoughts on, and it's kind of an out there idea. So classic Jake
Okay.
Brendan episode. Then I think you should have the closing word on dueling games, and we should talk about toy battle.
Great.
But Fox in the Forest being this trick taking game, I completely agree, and I think that trick taking games to me, Jake, and especially Fox in the Forest being 2-player, feels is both a game with a lot of touch points, right? Every single time I do anything, I'm interacting with one of your decisions, but they
Yep.
also don't always feel the most interactive for some
Mm.
reason. And there's not that's a contradiction in and of itself if we're always interacting for it to not feel like a very interactive game. But I think that if we did an episode on interaction, there's lots of ways in which we interact in games through blocking. I guess we did do an episode on blocking, right? Where I'm planning turn over turn, and maybe you're getting ahead of me and blocking me in a way physically that feels more interactive, then I don't know. There's something about the way that interaction plays out in trick taking games that's so cerebral that it feels a little bit different. And sometimes it can feel incidental. I didn't have enough information to know what you actually had in your hand. I'm just guessing. I don't know. Why am I grasping at straws here? Is there anything here? Should we just move on?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely trick taking has the thing where it's like sometimes you just don't have really any decisions at all to make, and that
Yeah.
doesn't feel like a
Sure.
fight, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not. But on the other hand, it to play a trick taking game well and like realize when you have the gears turned on your opponent and can
Mhm.
dictate the rest of the fight, that does kind of feel
Feel like
like a little
yeah.
bit like how an actual boxing match or whatever, right? Any
Mhm.
other kind of contest you could imagine can go when one of the combatants, one of the duelists gets kind of worn down and is sort of like, yep, this is just a matter of time until the checkmate happens, which is a dueling and chess term. So maybe go figure. Is chess to you? Is chess? Does that feel like a duel?
I think so because you're trying to force your opponent into no longer having any
Yeah,
moves, and I think that
that
suffocation
same reason.
yeah, is so much right there. And I do think, I am not a great chess player.
Hmm.
I've played a decent amount of chess in my life, but not a ton. I know that you do have to be thinking about what you think the other player will do in response, and that could inform your decisions, right? Like, I'm gonna go for the Ruy Lopez, and then I want the board to look like this because I think you're gonna make this response and go for that. So how can I force that, option to be worse? This is, like, very high level chess in the way that I don't experience it really,
Yeah,
but
good. My eyes are just glazing over.
yeah,
So,
yeah. No, exactly.
but
I think you're
some people listening to this podcast right now are like, "Hell yeah, Brendan, go off."
Yeah, I think anytime you're taking your opponent's agency away, you're in
Uh
a
huh.
duel, right? If I
Yeah,
capture your queen, all of a
yeah.
sudden I've hit you and you can do less. Yeah,
Do you know if maybe this is kind of like where I'll go, like, kind of end this conversation for now, and then we will continue it in our Discord after the episode? Is like
great.
obviously boxers. and like other sports players, tennis players, basketball, gymnastics, whatever, right? There is like a mental frame of like, I am a warrior when they're going into competition.
Yeah.
And I know that mental frame carries forward to like video game players.
Yeah.
Like if you're, follow any kind of like fighting game scenes or whatever, the way people talk about their games would be like, talking about themselves and their opponents as fighters, right? Like, I wonder if that same mental frame carries forward into the tabletop space. Like, do chess players feel like that? Do they use sports therapists in sort of like the same way? Do I do professional poker players who's same thing, right? Like making their living, kind of competing. Obviously, that's not like a two-player game, but like kind of competing, zero sum amount of chips in the
Yeah.
tournament.
I think the answer
Or
is
Magic player, yeah.
absolutely yes. Right? Once you get
So
to a high enough level, you can have a coach for anything.
yeah, so it's like and maybe no matter what the stakes, maybe, and so maybe that's just more about the stakes or whatever, but it does feel like the further kind of down you go, you get to a point where you yourself are not, you might be thinking like, I am engaged in a fight or whatever, like I'm engaged in a zero sum two-player game. But if I'm playing Lost Cities against you, I don't feel like I am a warrior, about to like
Sure.
take on an opponent in the ring. So
Yeah. Some people would say you don't feel like much of anything in Lost
yeah,
City.
yeah.
Like someone
I
collecting
am a
cards on a
number
table.
collector.
Yeah, exactly. Okay,
All right.
cool.
Let's transition to the next part of the conversation where we will be doing kind of a shallow toe tap into the kiddie pool of toy battle.
Yes. Okay. Toy Battle. This is a game that is, as I mentioned at the top of the show, designed by Paolo Mori and Alessandro Zucchini. It's a two-player game that plays in about 15 minutes. And my quick pitch for this is, Jake, it's almost like Stratego meets Dota meets Captain Flip, at least in the weight of game we're talking about. This is a quick game. What do you think?
Cannot wait for you to explain what you mean by that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, yeah, it's cool. It's very cool. Very, very easy to learn, fast to play, dynamic, engaging. Should we give it a Solomon scale rating here? One, two,
Yeah,
three.
that's it.
Okay, I will go first. For
Okay.
me, this is a 2. I've enjoyed my plays, but I haven't found it amazing enough to where like I could tell it's the kind of game that could be very addicting to some. Spoiler alert, but it didn't bite me in that way, and so I think I've played it about a dozen times.
Okay.
And I've had those, and I've found those plays to be quite fun, but not like, it hasn't been something to tremendously write home about, or keep seeking out more beyond playing with folks in the Decision Space Discord and our kind of tournament we have ongoing, and then just some pick up a game here or there.
Yeah. Great. And one of the reasons we like to do these reviews at the beginning, whether it's 1 to 10 or 1 to 3, I really like that we've been doing 1 to 3. I think it's very informative.
Yeah. So 1
Is
is kind of like not great, 2 solid, 3 great.
Great. Yep. Is because it gives you context for the conversation that we have around the game that follows those reviews, right? Our show's not really about the reviews. It's about the conversations that follow, but we like you to have context of where we're at headspace wise. So Jake, for me, I would say Toy Battle is a phenomenal design and a great game. A truly great game. I've played this game 259 times on Board Game Arena, and I got obsessed. So I got up to number 3 in the
In
world,
the
and then
world.
on Board Game Arena for an
Which
unreleased
is the
game.
world. I
Yeah,
mean, right? For all intents and purposes.
I think for this game right now, yeah, it comes out in May, so this is really the only place to play it right now. And I think I could have pushed for 1, but it was getting very grindy just being on the ladder. I have about 63% win rate. I think it's a fantastic game that's really cleanly designed, has interesting decisions, and a lot of having to think about why your opponent is making the decisions that they are to glean information about their tile rack. So how Toy Battle works is each side has a set of tiles, and you shuffle those tiles up. You throw a small number of them away without looking at them, and they are gone from you, from your side for the rest of the game. And then you have a headquarter on your side of the board and a headquarter on your opponent's side of the board, and then these little paths and nodes that connect those two headquarters in some ways. Uh, Anywhere there's nodes, whenever there's a negative space between those nodes, the designers have denoted some value to that. So maybe a really important grouping will give you 3 stars if you have your pieces on all 3 of those nodes. Your opponent, if they take them back, won't get those 3 because they've already been claimed. Each area can only be claimed once. So you can win Toy Battle by having the most sort of dominance over the board, those areas that you're claiming, just by getting those stars. You don't have to hold them to the end of the game. You just have to have collected the stars. If you have the most when the game ends occurs, you win the game. But also, let's say you just push really far and you push into your opponent's headquarters, you can also win the game that way. So you're often making these strategic considerations. Is this a game where I really want to push my advantage and try to push in and take my opponent's headquarters? Or is my position not strong enough for that? And I know I'm good in the mid game, but I don't have enough to really push. So I need to push to control territory early and then pivot to playing defense and just kind of starve the opponent out. And there's reasons why you would do both of those things. And those reasons come from the tiles largely. The tiles and how claiming these areas work is that on your turn, you can draw tiles. So you can draw 2 new tiles to your rack, or you can play a tile to the board. And the tiles range in value from 1 to 7. And then there's a wild tile that's a duck. And each of those tiles has a power associated with them. So the weakest one, the 1, is a skeleton that lets you draw 2 tiles. So it's basically like taking the no play action by getting to play. And you can play tiles to any location that's available on the board that doesn't have a tile in it or is a lower value than the tile you're playing. So a skeleton can only be played on top of the wild value, the duck, but it cannot be played against on top of the 2 value, the army man, um, because it is a lower value. The army man's power is you get to play again. So you play another tile to the board if you want, and you can chain them together. So if you have 3 army men, you could potentially play 4 tiles in a turn. Very powerful. And then this goes on. There's lots of really interesting powers. 3 is called Jumbo. He's a sort of armor guy that removes a tile from an adjacent location. That's a really important one because it adds this depth to the puzzle where I have to think about what tiles are in locations around where I might want to be playing and try to cut people off. It's one of the only tiles, in addition to the Army Man, that let you claim multiple spaces on a single turn, which is really important because this game is about momentum and tempo. A 4 is called a monkey. The monkey can go anywhere on the board. It doesn't have to be played connected to your headquarters, which is another rule. You always have to play such that your pieces are all at least connected back to your headquarters. The monkey can be played anywhere so long as its value is greater than the tile you're playing on. The 5 is a robot. It discards a card from your opponent's rack of tiles. That's really good. It gets you hand tempo. We'll talk about that in a minute. 6 is a unicorn. It's a 6, so that's great. It's almost the highest in the game. And it also lets you draw a tile. So it lets you play a very powerful piece of the board while also not losing tempo on your tile rack. That's important. The 7 is a Tyrannosaurus Rex, a dino. It's a 7. It's amazing. Nothing can cover it except for the duck. The duck is a wild. It can cover anything, but it can also be covered by anything. That's the whole tile set and the whole game.
Well said. Well done. Yeah, it's really quick, really easy to learn. And I mean, where do you want to start with this? You want to like go through the pieces? I will say learning and like exploring kind of the interaction of the pieces has been just a delightful part of the game.
Yeah.
A short anecdote as I was playing a game in the Decision Space Toy Battle Tournament against a player who's has played more higher elo than me, and I was kind of thought I was dead, way behind. And then I was like, well, okay, draw 2 tiles and got the double army man or whatever. And
Sure.
then it's just on my army man lets you play again. So out of nowhere, I was like, play an army man, win the game. It's, and it's the kind of thing where it's like, I mean, once you've seen it once, you probably don't ever lose to that again, but or at least you're like aware that that could happen. But that was like a highlight moment and kind of a fun way of seeing like, oh, okay, the sequencing of these tiles is pretty important because they
Yeah.
all the effects are quite powerful if used correctly.
Yeah. Okay, so that really feels like when you play a lot of Toy Battle, someone beating you with an Army Man victory that's more than 2 can feel very cheesy, right? Where it's sort of like,
Yeah,
your draw was really good. But at the same time, you can build for that.
right.
This is at its core, this is a hand management game, right? Where you
You
have
just
this
need to have
rack of tiles.
not one or less on the spaces surrounding your base, and then you can't get cheesed out.
Right, because the army men have to be played on top of a 1 or a duck or an empty space.
Yeah,
So you then have to think, okay, maybe I need to play more defense, right? When you first start playing this game, I had the experience
yeah.
of what do I even want to be doing?
Go forward.
Yeah, I'll put pieces down. That'll be good enough. And then the more you play, you sort of get okay, maybe the first hierarchy of thinking is, oh, I'll play skeletons first because I'll claim territory and I'll get more tiles. Having more tiles is good because I'll have more options and I'll understand what options I'll have win, and that's good. So I'll just play my skeletons to start. So let's say you start the game, you play skeletons, but then your first tiles out, the ones directly next to your headquarters are skeletons, which means they can get stomped on by every bed later in the game and come back to haunt you. So then maybe after you've played a little bit more, then
That
you start
is
playing unicorns
very
or
elegant
yeah,
design, right? Where the tile that seems like obviously you want to play first, right? Who cares? Like, I'm not going to be competing with my opponent for a while on this. Let's just play down the skeleton, get some extra tiles into my hand. Uh, has You're right. So, like, for all intents and purposes, without the army man power existing at exactly number 2, that would be an optimal move. But it's just a really elegant way, I think, to design in an inherent drawback to that level 1 kind of
power.
heuristic.
And I think that something that's
In
so cool
power.
about it, Jake, is because this game is fairly simple, right? It's this 15-minute game with the simple tile set that you can grok fairly quickly. You're just trying to control space. It feels really natural. You, as a player, have a lot of room for considerations you might not have in a more complex game. So the more you play, the second that someone plays a skeleton, I know that they're going to be weak on that side, right? Because either I'm going to play on top of the skeleton that's higher than that, and they're going to have to commit another one to that space, or they're going to have to play something defensively on top of the skeleton. And if you're ever in a position where you're playing a tile on top of your own tile, you don't want to be doing that.
You're
But you
getting
can be
2 for
forced
1.
to. You're getting 2 for 1. You don't want to get 2 for 1. Exactly. So the more I've played, the more I've realized, okay, if someone does play a skeleton early, and I'll do this sometimes, right? Sometimes I play skeletons early, but then I have to think, how am I going to defend that side in the future? But if someone plays a skeleton early, already my mind, the second they do that, okay, how am I going to attack that side? And can I stomach saving up army men and forcing them into a bad spot? Already that becomes the plan from turn 1 because now the whole tenor of the board has been shaped. But then there's these other avenues, right? That's one of the ways that you can lose, someone coming into your HQ. But it's not the only thing you want to be thinking about, because we talked about how you can also lose by not controlling enough of the board when the game ends, or not controlling enough of the board throughout the game as it ends. So you're considering a few different things. There's these avenues of attack in Toy Battle. That's sort of accelerating for the HQ capture. That's what we just covered. Then there's just controlling the board. What lines are my opponent going to play to? Which sides of the board are they going to capture? How much power, just value of all the tiles in that line are there? But then there's also the hand, right? How many tiles do I have in my hand? How many tiles does my opponent have in their hand? And that's another really important consideration that I think gives this game a strong sense of pacing, right? Because
Mhm.
if it's the middle of the game and I've controlled some in the middle and you've controlled some in the middle and we're sort of going back and forth, but I've made advances with tiles that I'm drawing more tiles and you haven't. So I have more tiles than you and you have less. I'm the beatdown. I'm attacking. And I'm trying to get as close to you as possible with as high of values as possible to limit the number of tiles that you can play. I think Toy Battle, when I first started playing, I was always trying to decide, am I trying to accelerate towards the HQ or control territory? And I think that is the case. That is true. But I'm also just trying to lock my opponent out of as many of options on their turn as I can, right? The closer to their HQ I can get with higher values, the fewer options that they're going to have to defend, meaning I'm almost locking them out of physical tiles. So I'm going to be playing what I want and they're not going to be playing what they want. And that just feels, that's fun for me. I love that. It's great.
I can see it why you're the number 3 or
No,
top
well, I
10
have dropped. I will say,
top
only top
10
100
toy
now.
battle
Yeah.
player in the world. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it's really cool to hear you talk about this because for the more like lay person perspective of just playing this a handful of times, it is definitely the case where I'll be everybody has the same stack of tiles, right? The
Yeah.
randomly shuffled stack of tiles. So we're all playing the same tokens. We don't have access to the same tokens at the same time because it's
Yeah.
random.
And
But
some of them are
essentially,
gone. Yeah.
right, but we're all doing the kind of the same stuff. And you play the game and you're exchanging. I put down my 3 to destroy your thing. You put down your 3 to destroy my thing. And then you kind of get to the middle game, or at a certain point, I realize I've fallen behind. Like,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, this situation is worse for me. And for such a simple game, it's pretty cool how it's not all, it's not uh, like when I play a more skilled person in chess, right? Where it's like, okay, I blundered. Whoops,
Mm,
there goes my queen. Right here, it's a little bit less clear, kind of like where and when gains
mm,
are made,
yeah.
um, which is interesting, right? So it's sort of like a feedback thing where I think the feedback in this game sometimes really strong, right? If the first time I see I win or lose by somebody going like army man, game over. That's pretty strong feedback, right? That's something that's going to stick in my head. And I'm going to say, okay, I need to remember that for a future game. But a
Yeah.
lot of the feedback is way cloudier than that, right? It's
Mhm.
it's much more incremental and marginal gains here and there, which I think is actually really excellent and cool to demonstrate that this is a game that has a really high learning curve, and for it to emerge out of such a simple set of rules and restrained tile set of just
Yeah.
seven tokens, and 7 easy to understand powers.
Yeah. Yeah, completely. I mean, the ways that you can get ahead in Toy Battle are pretty interesting. I think this game, because of its simplicity, but also its relative complexity that emerges from it and its sort of abstract feel, has good heuristics. And one of them is the way that you can easily accumulate value against your opponent, and that where you can sort of get that hidden advantage that it doesn't immediately feel obvious, is you often don't want to be covering your opponent's tile with more than one higher than what they put, right? If I can, and
Mm.
that's a heuristic. That's not I won't do it. There's times where you have to. But if I can always put my robots on top of monkeys, 5s on top of 4s, I'm going to do it because I'm taking space while not ceding that much value of potential on the board, right? It feels worse to put a 5 on top of a 2 because in the future, when I have a 4 that I could have put on that 2, I I won't necessarily have the same target, and I also might have needed that 5 to put on a 4. So does that make sense what I'm saying?
Super, yeah, it makes sense. I'm I'm like kind of like, oh yeah, that does make sense. I never once thought about that
Sure.
in
Yeah.
my plays of this
Yeah.
game.
You
I
did
think
get
I was
obsessed. Yeah.
right. Yeah, I did not pick up on that. And I think I was, just be, until you get over. So it is a simple learning curve, right? Um, or sorry, it's a simple rule set, but the learning curve, I think, maybe for all the reasons that we're talking about, and for the reasons why this is kind of like an interesting conversation about heuristics, like
Yeah.
the learning curve is maybe a little bit steeper than you think.
Yeah.
Just because, yes, there are 7 tiles, they're all easy to understand, but that's kind of a lot of information to hold in your head as you're kind of like coming to terms with like what everything does.
Yeah.
not insurmountable by any means. Probably by the time you've played the game 6 or 7 times, you've kind of got that in the back of your head and can start to plan.
Yeah.
But I think we should give credit to the fact that there is something to that. It does take a little bit to start, like, really being able to engage in that sort of like donkey space of like, okay, yeah, I need to be worried about armament here. And I think that's kind of where I'm at in the game, right? It's like starting
Totally.
to be like, what are the powers I should be watching out for? I haven't gotten to
Yeah.
like the like, oh, now that I know all that, I can go to the next level of being like, I should be efficiently deploying my
Sure.
things, and then like to consider the, I guess, like kind of the geography of the board, like where am I strong, where
Yeah.
am I weak? I haven't really
Yeah.
been doing that at all. That feels
Sure.
like even another layer further down.
Yeah. What's the total power of this line, and how could I make an opening? Can I play a duck to bait out a low value thing because I think you don't have a lot of things, so that then I can use an army man or
I did
something?
want to ask you like
Yeah.
about the ducks specifically, because that is
Okay.
one where I'm like, oh, I have no idea how I'm supposed to be using this. Like, I get
Yeah.
that it's really good to cover up, like it's the only
A
thing you can
7.
to beat the 7 with.
Yeah. That's what you wanna do with it.
That's all it's
Is
for.
it
It
I
seems
mean, it's
bad
not
if you're not
all
doing
it's
that.
for, but it's
Yeah,
bad if you're not doing that. Yeah.
yeah.
Because you're giving yourself an open door to be walked
I think
upon,
I
but
was like
sometimes you have
sick.
to.
Like, I get to the first time I played it, I was like, dope, I can cover anything with this. And then they put like the skeleton on it. It's like, oh
Yeah.
no, it
Yeah.
sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's the dream. To put skeletons on top of ducks is the way you wanna be doing this game. The duck is really, really important, but it's really, really important when you're playing aggressively typically, right? Where if you're playing this aggressive game where you're trying to win the opponent's headquarters, you're trying to storm their doors and then suffocate them. And you're going to do that by playing high value tiles. But you're going to do that not just by playing high value tiles, you're also going to do that by having more tiles in your hand. And sometimes that means having ducks. And sometimes once you get there, just having ducks means if ducks are the only tiles in your hand that are more than the other person, it can be helpful to have a duck. If you have 4 tiles and they have 2 and you're
Yeah,
knocking on their door, I feel good having a duck because I can cover anything. So
yeah,
if I have skeletons and ducks and 2 sevens, I might push for a win. Where if I put the 7 there and I know you're going to cover it with a duck, okay, I can play a skeleton on top of it, and you're going to be able to play anything on it. And maybe with my skeleton, I'll draw something I could cover efficiently. Or if not, I'll play a duck and I'll just try to outlast your hand and
yeah,
suffocate you that way. So ducks are not something you just want to throw around, to your point in this game. Can I
yeah,
mention something else that I
yeah,
think that people that's really cool about this game that you can think about because it's a relatively small dueling game that you couldn't think about otherwise or as easily in a multiplayer game? And that's I'm always, Jake, thinking about, is the average value of tiles in my rack higher or lower than my opponent's? Probably. Like, is the total is the average value higher or lower? And if it's higher, how can I use that to my advantage? And if it's lower, how can I not? And if it's too high, if I have 3 sevens, I need to draw tiles. Because if I have 3 sevens, the average value of my hand is 7, and that means if they play a robot, I will no matter what lose value. So, and I can't afford to lose too many dragons, dinosaurs. They're dinosaurs, not dragons. So I'm too exposed. So that's a time where even if I was going to attack, I
dragons
would
on the brain,
otherwise,
huh?
yeah, I guess so. That's funny. I would otherwise, I'll just draw because I need to lower how exposed I am to getting robots thrown out, which could make me lose to randomness.
Yeah,
Does that make sense? Yeah.
kind of. Yeah, I've obviously been thinking about that. I got that
Sure.
far.
Yeah.
Only by thinking
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
obviously I'm thinking about the density of 7s in my deck versus my hand. Brendan, we're not idiots, okay? I feel like shame on you. No, that is really interesting. Um and the more you talk about this game, like the more I think I would enjoy this game and will continue to enjoy it as I play it more.
Yeah.
So I could see coming up on it. I mean, like all this stuff is really exciting me. Like I kind of want to think more about it. One thing I'm seeing here in the notes is that you say the baseboard is amazing. Other boards are fun too. I'm not sure that I've played on the baseboard ever. like all the
Mm.
boards I've played on have had like some kind of quirk
Mm.
where some of the actions have triggered abilities or a space that's like neutering the abilities. And
Sure.
it's really cool, I think, how that in that, interacts with the powers and all that stuff. But it feels like it increases the complexity to like a whole other like magnitude of that I don't really want right now
Yeah.
as I'm like trying to like learn. I think I would enjoy the baseboard more because when we're everything you said, and now I'm like factoring in, okay, but the middle of this board will take away the ability of
Mm.
everything. So you really want to like maybe save your sevens for that because the sevens don't have abilities. So like sevens and ducks only. Um, but
Or
yeah,
maybe a skeleton if you're ahead. Yeah, it's tricky. Yeah.
right. Yeah. And what can you afford to sacrifice? And then another one's like you can a different board, you play spots and you can like
I can
recall stuff to your hand,
So
like
that's the
your stuff.
baseboard. That's
Oh,
the
that is the
baseboard.
base.
The green
Okay.
one with just the two headquarters that sort of leads up with a triangle from yours and then two outshoots. That's the baseboard. So for me,
Okay.
what I have here is it's like a no items, final destination
But there
type
is
thing.
items. Dude, you can
Yeah, I
return
guess
stuff
so.
to your
It's the
hand.
most basic. But honestly, Jake, you often, when I was first playing, I was really trying to figure out how to make those work for you.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is you don't unless you're playing the you're not accelerating for the HQ. If you're playing the board domination game and you can use it to gain some sort of marginal advantage, like picking up a unicorn or something from an area of the board that you no longer care about, that
Yeah.
can be good. Otherwise, you're spinning plates and you're wasting time. So
That's that's
don't
been my
don't do it.
experience.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
don't
think
do it.
I've been like, okay, cool, extra I get to do an extra action when I go here,
Yeah.
bonus action, and then it's like you're actually ceding a lot of
Territory.
tempo and
Yeah.
now I'm all of a sudden I'm behind or
Yeah.
what right
Exactly. I love when people go for those early because it's like, "Oh, this game I'm the aggressor. You went early for one of those spaces on the left side. I'm gonna beat you on the right side."
yeah.
And let's see if I can rush it. But I do think a lot of the boards are interesting. You mentioned the one where the middle of the board, none of the powers take effect. So the middle of the board ends up sort of being this really hard place to cross through.
Right.
Um, there's another one where there's special spaces that just give you the armyman power without playing an armyman. When you play to the space, you get to do it. So you can set up these spaces where you sort of claim territory and then use that to claim even more territory. Or maybe if you include army men, you have this even more bombastic turn. There's boards where one side has two headquarters and one side has one headquarter. There's a lot of interesting stuff. And I think that that's partially what makes this game a 3 for me is the base game is incredible. And then every board I've played on is interesting and fun. And the base board is enough for me to just have a phenomenal game. So it all feels like expansion gravy.
Awesome. Yeah. Come on. When are they going to release an expansion for this game already? Let's get some new
Yeah,
tiles
right.
out there. We've
Come
already
on.
played it 250 times. How much longer must we wait for expansion tiles?
I think that's an interesting question. I will say, for a game that's not out yet, is this? I know you're being facetious, but the tiles set and the powers associated with them, you could absolutely design something else. But the way you're fighting for tempo in hand, fighting for tempo on board, and then also the way those powers interact, I think is so well designed, so well developed that it would be really hard to create another set or add new things that didn't in some way really mess with the perfect balance here. And it's almost like you're playing rock paper scissors with in sort of two-handed at once, where one hand has 8 options and the other hand is controlling the board or accelerating for the headquarters. And you're having to do the sort of like patting your head, rubbing your belly type thing. And it's just, yeah, it's delightful. It's really interesting. I think final thing I'll say about this game. On its face, it almost presents like an abstract, and I think some people have that response to this by their gut, or they'll play once and they'll get beat by an army
Yeah.
men rush. And they're like, "Oh, this is an abstract with high randomness. This sucks." And for me, it's not that at all because it's
No, that's Captain Flip, I think.
which I also love.
I know, just kidding.
Hugely skill testing, but hugely skill testing, but skill testing because of variability, right? No two games ever play out the same because I can't come into the game taking a strategic line from turn one. I have to see what my tiles are and then make a decision from there. And oftentimes I'm going to just draw 2 tiles and get more information and then see what happens. But with that said, I'll always be creatively problem solving because I'm taking solutions that worked in the past, applying them to new contexts, taking this strategy of trying to suffocate the opponent by getting high values on them, but deciding when I have to compromise and back off when it's not a good use of my resources, trying to be creative about how to control the sort of areas that have 2 stars in them in that base board. That's really valuable for controlling the areas and winning that way. I think it's a brilliant game. Also, there's room where you can learn that you're doing something wrong in a game with really simple pieces. So the 3, the jumbo, that just slashes one, it's really tempting to just play that and cut someone's piece down without gaining more advantage than that. But usually when you play that, you want to be taking
putting those
space with
suckers
it.
out there.
Yeah, but you really want to put it on top of a 2 and then cut down that one of theirs so that you reveal one of yours. That's a 2-for-1, exactly. So that's Toy Battle. It's coming out in May. I think it's a great game. If you want to demo it, it's on Board Game Arena now.
Super cool. And we didn't do our like typical characterizing the decision space, but I think you heard a lot in there if you listen to the show where this is like a game that has really simple set of decisions, play a tile or draw tiles.
Yep.
But within that, like if you're somebody who likes games that are high on the evaluative side of things, you could go as deep as you want in sort of figuring out like the weight of the numbers in your hand versus your deck and the power layout on the board. It's all there for you. Super super cool game. I totally agree. I'm excited to play it more. So I think that brings us to the end of this week's episode, and we invite all of you to join us in our Discord. Come there, play Toy Battle against, learn with me, play with me. Once you get really good, we can challenge Brendan for the belt, and then we'll also talk about this episode there. So really excited to talk with y'all about Dueling Games and Toy Battle. So looking forward to seeing you there.
Until next time, we hope you'll check out decisionspacepodcast.com, where you can see all of our past episodes, an index of games we've talked about, a link to our Patreon, where you can see where people have supported us, and a link to our Discord, too, where you can come talk about this episode. Thank you to Hembry for our intro and outro song, Reach Out. Next week, a cool guest episode. After that, top 10s. Vote for us on BGG for best podcast. Thanks. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all. See ya.